what you're being asked to consider on amendment number 2 is whether to allow the governor, reduced to its essence, whether to allow the governor and the General Assembly, of which Senator Beavers is a member, to select your appellate judges. The circuit judges and the chancery judges, the people you see every day, stand for election. They have to run opposed every 8 years. Whereas the appellate judges, that is the people who look at their decisions and decide whether they've been properly parsed or not, do not. And that is the result of a corrupt bargain that was struck in 1971 between, and some of y'all are way too young to remember this, but in 1970 Tennessee began to turn Republican. And Senator Albert Gore was defeated for re-election. Senator Baker beat him. Then Senator Brock won, and then Winfield Dunn won. If these are names familiar to you, they were all Republicans. And also the Republican Party began making inroads in the General Assembly. Now today, we're accustomed to supermajorities, but in 1970, that was not the case. I mean, we were a solid South Democratic Party. And then Lieutenant Governor John Wilder and Ned McWhirter looked up one day and said, oh my goodness, we're going to lose the judiciary next. Because in the 1854 Constitution, the founders of our state said that all judges, not just trial judges, but all judges will run for election. And so they changed that and said, what we'll do is we will appoint the judges, that is the governor will, and then every 8 years a governor will run for retention. That is to say, shall Judge Shoaf be retained or not? In other words, I couldn't run against a judge if I wanted to. And that went through in the middle of the night. Governor Dunn agreed to it, and to his very great credit, he has since repented of that. But that's how we got these retention elections. And that last August, when you went to the polls, you saw 22 names that said, will they be retained or not? You didn't, I mean, nobody could run against them. So that corrupt bargain, and I'm going to use a word that I'm afraid may offend some of you, but it's an old word, it's an old English word, that was a bastard child. It was illegitimately conceived, it was born out of wedlock, it was never in what the founders of our republic intended. The Democrats just ignored this bastard child for years, and for, 40 years we've lived under this regime where they took away your right to vote. Because if you read the Constitution, it says that the Supreme Court and all inferior courts, and that is to say the Court of Appeals, shall be elected by the qualified voters of the state. It doesn't say there'll be a retention election. It doesn't say that the governor will appoint them. It doesn't say that the General Assembly will anoint them. It says they shall be elected. Now that we have supermajorities, the leaders of the Senate and the House have decided to legitimize this illegitimate child. And so they're asking you to go back and say, those men in 1854 didn't really mean what they said. Those men in 1870 didn't really mean what they said, because they debated for 4 days about whether to use the federal system. In other words, the federal system is the president appoints, the Senate confirms. The founders of our state, and I would say they did a pretty good job, wanted all judges to run for election. And so they're trying to fix this now since 1971, and I oppose it. I consider myself a citizen. I am not a serf. I want to vote for my judges, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to do so. Some of the greatest justices who ever sat on the Tennessee Supreme Court ran for election statewide. Some of the greatest justices who sat on the appeals court ran for election in their district. And so that's what they're asking you to do, is to give up your vote, which they took away from you in the middle of the night in 1971.